Welcome back to our final segment. Joining me now, Senate Republican leader John Braun. Senator Braun, thank you for your time today. What are the top priorities for the Senate Republican caucus in the 60-day session?
Yeah, so you've heard us talk in recent years about affordability, public safety, education, issues with children in our state. Those are all still top issues for people we talk to around Washington, but by a large stretch, affordability is pulled away. So I almost say it's affordability, affordability, affordability. Folks are increasingly worried about just the cost of living here in Washington. Food, gas, housing, child care, health care have all been driven up by Democratic policies over the last several years, and to the point where it's really getting hard for people, struggling to pay their bills and to meet the basic requirements of living here in the state of Washington.
In terms of the tax proposals that have been discussed heading into the session, which are you most focused on?
Well, I think it's the wrong time for any type of tax increase. We just had the largest increase in taxes in our state's history by nearly a more order of magnitude. State and local tax increases nearly $13 billion over the next 4 years. Prior to that, probably $1 or maybe $2 billion was the most we've ever seen. So this is a big increase that's really causing problems for affordability across the state of Washington. The one that worries me the most, simply because the people of the state of Washington have spoke out so often and so negatively about it, is the idea that the Democratic majority is going to put in place an income tax. It flies in the face of a nearly 100-year-old precedent, flies in the face of 10 votes of the people to say no, 11 if you count the initiative of the legislature that they sent 2 years ago, that the legislature nearly unanimously approved. So I think that that is the one that is most at odds with the will of the people of the state of Washington.
In a 60-day session, do you see that passing?
I think it'd be tough. This is even if we thought it was a good idea, which we very much do not, this is a very complicated piece of legislation. When you do that, if you're serious about actually improving the level of progressivity in our tax system, reducing regressive taxes, you got to actually not just put that in place, but also take away taxes. I don't think there's any preparation to do that. The budget, current budget situation doesn't really make that easy. But on top of that, it's a difficult policy to get it right so that we don't harm our small businesses. We actually haven't seen a bill draft of what the Democrats are proposing, but what they've talked about makes it very much seem like this is aimed at small and medium-sized businesses and will put them at a significant disadvantage to businesses in other states. We also have to deal with businesses in our state that do business across state lines, and therefore, how do you deal with apportionment? Who pays tax when and to who? These are very, very complicated issues to get right if we want to do it in a way that doesn't do harm to our state's economy. Let's be clear, our state's economy is already sort of on the ropes. The last thing we need is another big hit like this.
Are there bills in your caucus that would, in the short term, make life more affordable?
Yeah, there are a couple things that are out there. One is a pretty straightforward one, and one you might think is odd, but because the voters approved the cap and trade system at the ballot box last year, but that is driving a lot of the cost of living. Nearly 70 cents a gallon in gas prices, and of course, as you add in transportation costs, that affects the cost of everything. So one bill that's out there, I think has already been dropped, is to just pause it for 6 months. Give folks to get their feet underneath them and allow us to adapt to these very extreme and frankly regressive taxes that Democrats put in place last year. So that's a simple one that I don't think we try not to be at odds with the vote of the people, but also give some relief to folks who are struggling.
Given the budget picture that's out there, what do you see as the most likely areas for cuts?
So I don't think there's a one area. When you talk about good budgeting, and I worked on the budget for many years, you rarely find that one single magic, change or savings or reduction that fixes the problem. It's almost always, looking at the growth curve over time for the core services we provide: education, medication, incarceration. Those are kind of the three big things we do. Look at what we're doing and what's growing faster than inflation, what's growing faster than revenues, and see why is that, and what we can do, what policy we can change to get after that. Most importantly, I think we got to look back at the budget budget and say, where are we delivering beyond the basic services of state government? Where are we going beyond the priorities of government? You used to hear a lot about that, back in the early 2000s, even prior to that. The priorities of state government. What can we do that nobody else can do? What do we have to do? That's our responsibility, to take care of the vulnerable, etc. Where have we taken that and gone beyond so that we're providing something extra? I think that's where you start to look at places where we can bend the cost curve over time. But I think it's super important we do that by maintaining core services, particularly on vulnerable.
Going back to the income tax proposal there, some proponents of an income tax argue that voters have signaled they're open to it by rejecting the capital gains tax repeal in previous years. What do you think?
I think that there's a large difference between a capital gains income tax and a regular income tax. I think the more recent, in fact, as I said, there was an initiative to the legislature, passed by the legislature, that came with, I think, nearly 500,000 signatures, basically nearly was that 25%, not quite 25% of the voting public signed that and said, we want this. I find it hard to believe that all of a sudden, after years and years of rejecting the income tax at the ballot box, the voters have changed their mind. I think the key thing when you look at that is are the Democrats so sure this is what people want that they're willing to keep, if they go forward with this, that they keep an emergency clause off of it so it can go directly to the people in the form of a referendum. So they get to weigh in on the bill just like the legislature weighs in on the bill. That's the right way to figure out if you're going to do it, and I don't think you should do it at all, I want to be clear, but if you're going to do it, that's how you make sure that we truly capture the will of the people.
Some of your Democratic counterparts in previous interviews today have mentioned bills that will be coming this year to ban the use of masking by law enforcement and to regulate flock camera usage to prevent the imagery from being able to be shared with the federal government. From a public safety perspective, what's your take on those ideas?
Yeah, I think this is a very situation-dependent issue. I think we have to be very aware that our law enforcement officers in Washington State and federal law enforcement officers have been under attack. Their lives have been threatened. They've been doxxed. I think that we need to be respectful of their privacy and make sure that they aren't and their families aren't subject to additional physical threats. I think that's why you see masks. Masks aren't a new thing in law enforcement. They've been used selectively in individual circumstances. I think you got to be very careful of that. Some reasonable restrictions, I think, make sense, but doing it in the face of violent threats to our law enforcement, I think is a bad idea. We already struggle here in Washington where we have the lowest number of law enforcement per capita in the country. It meaningfully contributes to the level of crime in our state that is still at historic highs. We're having trouble recruiting in law enforcement across the state. I think we need to be very careful that we don't send a signal that law enforcement is no longer valued and that we are okay with physical threats to law enforcement and their families. That's a bad idea, and we should push back on that.
We've got a little under 2 minutes left here, but Senator, I want to get your perspective on the growing legal liability the state of Washington's consistently having to pay or paying out related to lawsuits now. Any strategies to deal with that? What do you think is driving that?
Well, what's driving is the state has not done a good job of looking after folks in their care, whether it's elderly or developmentally disabled or children, particularly children at risk, either involved in the child protection system or involved in foster care. We have failed repeatedly, and I think that's where you start. You start by saying, how do we do a better job and make sure we keep folks in our care safe and in good shape? And because when you think about the number, now nearly $500 million this last year, that's a big number, and certainly in a budget context, there's a lot of things we could do with that money, either to give it back to taxpayers or spend it on more valuable services. But the starting point is the harm that is behind that, Let's fix that first. And then we can deal with other items that will make the process go better. And don't get me wrong, I'm certainly in favor of some level of tort reform. I find it hard to believe that my counterparts on the other side of the aisle are truly interested in that. But if they are, I'm certainly interested. But we got to start by not doing any more harm to the folks in our care.
Senator Braun, I'm afraid we're out of time. We will have to leave it there. Thank you very much. That was the Senate Republican leader, and that concludes our Sine Die live opening day coverage. The legislative session is scheduled to officially begin around noon or shortly thereafter. The Impact returns Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. Be well.
All right.